All right, Nick, don't make fun of the background too much. We just moved, and a lot of stuff is in the garage, and the computer's in the garage. All right. Welcome to part 194 of our 196 part series on mortality and ethical dilemmas in the end stage of life. Today, we'll be discussing a documentary called Being Mortal. It's a documentary that touches on several subjects regarding the end of life and challenges that face doctors and patients and their families. It discusses communicating the realities of poor prognosis with patients and the decisions that people face during that time. It also discusses ethical dilemmas that arise when life and choices are limited. Hippocrates is not in the documentary, but I wanted to start this presentation with him because he penned the famous Hippocratic Oath some 2,500 years ago. Uh, the most famous part of that oath is the part that says that a physician will do no harm. I think pretty much everyone's heard about that. It's a sound principle, but as we will see, it does get complicated rather quickly. And this documentary does a good job sort of displaying that. Um, Doctors have a responsibility to their patients. One of those responsibilities is to deliver to them their prognosis. When that prognosis is bad, when the treatments are limited, they sometimes have difficulty communicating that reality. Essentially, no one likes to receive bad news, and it's incredibly difficult to deliver it. In the documentary, Dr. Gawanda, who is the subject as well as the I believe like sort of producer of the documentary, he sits down with the husband, and sort of like one of the opening scenes of the husband of one of his now deceased patients. He admits to lying actually, which when there is a negative outcome could be considered malpractice. And the husband actually sort of lightheartedly points that out. Um, he offered a treatment to a patient who had terminal lung cancer. She had stage four. It was a complicated thing because she was quite young. She also had just had a baby. She had a newborn. She actually gave birth to the newborn with essentially one lung function. It was a very difficult birth, but she did, go through it. He clearly had like he had a soft spot for these people. Um, he ends up offering a treatment, and he stated that it was possible that it could help with the cancer when he knew that it couldn't and that it wouldn't. He says in the documentary that he was just looking for something positive to say. And the treatment actually did result in a worse outcome. The husband points out a couple times that they forewent her quality of life in pursuit of more time, and ended up sort of shortening her time and shortening the quality of her time. Um, she was too weak at the end to hold her newborn child. It's a pretty heartbreaking story, honestly. And her husband he ends up sort of wondering aloud how much time they actually sacrificed, the quality of his wife's last days, in seeking out more time. Sometimes doctors are also perfectly clear. Patients can and do oftentimes resist bad news. There was an instance in the documentary in which a patient was told, really in no uncertain terms, that she should expect to live no longer than like 3 to 4 months. And her first response was, "There are always miracles that can happen in between." So it can be that even when a physician is like fairly clear about what the prognosis is and what to expect, that patients will resist. They will resist bad news. Um, they also may not necessarily comprehend the news sometimes. Doctors um, spend years of training, have years of experience, and patients don't. And there's an asymmetry there that may also factor into the miscommunication. The doctor may sort of like truly know that there is no more treatment sort of to be found, and a patient will live in they'll live in the in between. They'll live in the uncertainty and perhaps delude themselves a little bit into thinking that a more positive outcome is like to be had. Um, and there's also a real need for patients to participate, to be participants in their own care, and to a certain extent direct their own care. The doctors, with their expertise, make recommendations, but it's important that the patient has to consent to treat or even direct their own care in some circumstances. There's a good example in this documentary of a patient sort of attempting to direct their own care. They wanted to. There was an experimental drug treatment. I believe he had brain cancer, and There's an experimental drug that just had FDA approval, and he wanted to get on it. The doctor sort of clearly doesn't believe that it's going to have any benefit to him, and relays to him that they would not be able to be on the drug as a sort of like in a clinical trial sense, that if he were to have it, it would be as a sort of compassionate um, prescription. She says she'll look into it. And there was a counterpoint of a doctor telling a patient that they weren't going to do any more treatments because the reality was that the treatments would make her worse and that she would not receive any benefits from the treatment. So, although patients should and are encouraged to take part in their own care and, like I said, in some ways direct their own care, it has to be tempered by the doctor's expertise and experience. And there's a delicate balance at play there between compassion and empathy versus objectivity. Will the patient receive a medical benefit from treatment, or is the treatment worse than the illness? This is what is oftentimes a complicating factor in the oath that a physician takes to do no harm. Particularly when a patient seeks for the treatment when they would not stand to benefit from it, and it would only make it worse, really. The decision to offer and undergo aggressive treatments is sort of the extreme of that. It's not a decision to be taken lightly, and one has to weigh the benefit of the treatment versus the cost. If it ruins one's quality of life and there's no hope of recovery or the lengthening of life in any meaningful way, physicians will typically choose against treatment, as they should. In that kind of circumstance, the treatment would do harm. It would do more harm against sort of the inevitable. And sometimes patients are understanding of this. There was a particular example of a very self-aware patient in the documentary, but people oftentimes cling to hope when there is none to be found in a prolonging of life. At this point, the quality and dignity in the end is what should be most considered. Patients would mostly choose also to pass at home. One patient was allowed to in the documentary. Well, more than one, I think, but particularly one was allowed to. And his passing was kind of touching. He died on his farm amongst his family. He was with his wife and grandchildren. They were with him. Another patient required treatments and the alleviation of her symptoms to pass with dignity. She was the one who had sort of like hoped for kind of a miracle. And she remained in the hospital at the sort of gentle like direction of her doctor. There is so there's something I think about often. It's not a huge part of the documentary, but it did strike me. One woman was told that she should take off work. It's not clear whether she did or didn't, but that may not be an option for a lot of people. It's not an option because of sort of the coercive nature of the system we live in. Um, it's something I sort of discuss often with my peers. Um, it's a factor in dignity or the lack thereof at the end that I don't think should be ignored. The system as we have set it up right now does not, in my opinion, foster a doctor's responsibility and oath to do no harm. It does not foster um, a healthy healthcare system, it doesn't allow, I think, people to approach the end with dignity oftentimes. And I harp on about this. In this class, I'm thinking of a couple of others. I've had to sort of resist talking about it too much. But I think there are compelling systemic forces at play that I think do also need addressing, that would allow for uh, a more dignified end and would allow for much better outcomes. We can do a much better job um, with a reform of the system that we currently have. So, in conclusion, the takeaways that I took from this documentary is that quality of life matters. Honest communication between doctors and the patient they treat is essential to ensure the dignity of their lives at the end. That being said, also patient autonomy must also be respected. Ethical decisions are deeply personal, they are complex. We will all go through some version of this. It's important to have another takeaway. It's important to have these conversations now. Um, he touches on this a lot. There's sort of no good time. There's sort of like no opportune moment. His dad, he has some very personal reflections about what his father went through, who's also a physician. His dad is. There was another person in there that they talk about where they found it really difficult to have these conversations despite all of them being physicians. So you can imagine what a layperson would have to go through. And sort of on a more personal note, it's a stark reminder to cherish your loved ones, spend time with your friends, and do the things that you love. And so, in closing, I will actually close out with a quote that struck me. What matters in the last stages of life is not what you want from life, but what life wants from you. Okay, thank you so much.